I believe you are quite aware the situation has changed since last we spoke.
The truth is still the truth, and a bargain is still a bargain.
And Mayor Cermak is now deceased.
Yes. What does that have to do with our contract?
I do not recall signing a contract with you, Mr. Allan.
We had a verbal agreement. I'm sure my uncle here will attest to that.
Nathan, please. You're being most rude.
But Dawes reacted just as I knew he would.
Lewis, as a family man, I quite understand your position. As for you, young Mr. Heller, you should not have spoken to the papers of this. It was a breach of confidence.
Nothing was said of our arrangement being a confidential one. Besides which, I was in fact discreet.
How so?
I didn't tell the reporters why I was offered the job at the fair. Void our deal, sir, and I'm going to be put into an embarrassing light. I will have to inform the press of your involvement.
This reeks of blackmail, young man.
It reeks of business. Our arrangement is binding in my view, and if you feel differently, I'll be noisy about it.
Nathan.
I'm not a big wheel like you, General. But us little wheels can get good and goddamn squeaky when we don't get our grease.
My secretary will have contracts ready for you to sign this afternoon at 4. Please return and sign them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your collector friend, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Robcasting here from the Robservatory. This is, of course, Robservations episode number 1018.
Tonight.
So you know who I am?
You made quite an impression.
What happened?
He just dropped in for a quick bite.
Roger Moore, Barbara Bach.
Let's worry about you, huh?
The spy who loved me. Next.
God damn, Barbara Bach is Agent Anya Amasova, or as we love to call her, Agent Triple X. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, however you identify across these, the 28 known galaxies, I am here to tell you that when I was a kid, that there was nothing more exciting. Here was the things I loved. I loved Twilight Zone. I loved Star Trek. I loved The Outer Limits. I loved sci-fi theater that was on 2 o'clock on Channel 11 on Sundays after I got home from Temple D. Hirsch Sinai in Seattle, Sunday school. I would be treated to a science fiction film. The only other thing that was more exciting than this, actually all these things were very exciting in their own ways, Outer Limits as well, was a James Bond movie. And, I had my great celluloid awakening when I was 5. That's when I started to really clock these things on a regular basis. When I realized there was information that was vital to the security of the empire in the pages of TV Guide that my mom would bring home every Wednesday from the grocery store. I started to make these, connections. And so it's really difficult to go back and, once again, at least I'm not an old man shouting at clouds, but it's hard to explain to people today how exciting James Bond movies were for kids. I mean, maybe not all kids, but all my friends that grew up on Mercer Island, Washington, because everybody watched the same shit because there was only 3 channels. There was no cable yet, and we had ABC, NBC, and CBS. We had PBS, one PBS station, and then we also had our independent news station channel, or independent station, not news, which was Channel 11, and later we got Channel 13. And it wasn't until I was 13 years old that my parents, because they were great and they loved me very much, they put a dish on our roof. It looked like a giant satellite dish, but it was long and thin and had more like what would come out of an RV in the 70s or something. And that's how we got Showtime. We didn't have cable, and we certainly couldn't get HBO. So James Bond movies were, when they were on Sunday nights, first of all, they were usually longer than 2 hours, so you had to beg to stay up. Like Thunderball was long, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was long, but what ABC television did to On Her Majesty's Secret Service is unforgivable. But I became a James Bond fan from the time I was a little kid. And, while I'd already loved curvaceous women because of Star Trek, that's what instilled the idea that the feminine form is truly a work of art. And the James Bond movies did nothing to dissuade me of this. And I certainly love that European look. Hips, bust, I loved it all. But it started when I was young. And James Bond, he was like Captain Kirk, somebody who was a little bit more down to earth that I wanted to aspire to be. And the thing about James Bond was not only was he an action hero, not only was he the world's greatest lover, but he knew everything about everything. In The Spy Who Loved Me, he can look at tropical fish in a tropical fish tank and know what they are. He knew what temperature to serve champagne at. He knew what caviar was from what region in Russia. And it was like, who didn't want to be James Bond? And it was a big, big, big deal. And it's hard to explain, in case you didn't. And what was great was that was the Star Tunnel, they called it, James Bond was always on ABC. And that was when it started, they made it feel like an event. And by the way, that voice is, of course, the great Ernie Anderson, who was the voice of basically ABC. He is the father of film director Paul Thomas Anderson. He of There Will Be Blood fame, Magnolia fame, Boogie Nights fame. That was his dad. And also the voice of Star Trek The Next Generation. And so it was, it felt like an event. And my dad would watch with me, and you'd go to school the next day and everybody would be talking about what went on. And for me growing up, I was born the year You Only Live Twice came out. So, we were talking about this, was it yesterday on Let's Get Physical Media? There are 25 official James Bond movies that were released from 1962 through, 2021? Was No Time to Die 2021? And they are, in order, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, Man with a Golden Gun, Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, I'm not reading these, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, A View to a Kill, Living Daylights, License to Kill, and then for the very first time from 62 to 89, there was a break in Bond movies. The biggest break, I think, was between 74 and 77 between Man with the Golden Gun and Spy Who Loved Me. And there was a 6-year break between License to Kill in 89 and GoldenEye in 95 because there was legal maneuvering. There's a great book called The Battle for Bond. It's a really interesting story about how a producer named Kevin McClory had teamed up with Cubby Broccoli. It was a rights issue, and the first Bond movie that was going to get made was Thunderball. But by the way, first of all, GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. And so, that break was interminable, and that was the end of the Dalton era. And there were 2 other films that were planned, but they were never made. And then Pierce Brosnan took over in '95's GoldenEye. So when I was growing up, the Bond franchise, pre-Star Wars, but so I was born when You Only Live Twice came out. I did not see On Her Majesty's Secret Service because I would have been 2. I would not have seen Diamonds Are Forever. I would have been 4. And so I probably saw, I want to say the first James Bond movie that I did see was in fact Diamonds Are Forever, but it might have been From Russia with Love. I can't remember. I was fucking 5. What do you want from me? But anyway, so the Bond franchise was a big deal. The first James Bond movie I saw in the theater was The Spy Who Loved Me, which I saw at Bellevue, Washington's late lamented John Dance Theater, which was also the headquarters of SRO, the Sterling Recreation Organization, that my uncle, Jerry Foreman, who was at one point the president of Pacific Theaters here in LA, Jerry Foreman used to get me, I had a pass to SRO theaters, so I could go to any SRO theater, which was all throughout the Seattle area, and see a movie for 50 cents, and I could take a guest. Thank you, Jerry Foreman. Scott and Jeff Foreman, his sons, still work in the business. I think Jeff's still at Disney in distribution. But it was a glorious time. But then at the home video era, I got a VCR in May of 1980. That was my big bar mitzvah present. And then I started to record James Bond movies off television, and I would sit there and cut the commercials out. And then they started to release Fox, CBS Fox. They started to release James Bond movies on VHS. And you could not get On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And RCA used to have a CED player that was literally a vinyl. It wasn't a laser disc. It was a vinyl disc that played video like a record player. And it was called a CED, Capacitance Electronic Disc. And the first time that they ever made On Her Majesty's Secret Service available on home video was on the RCA CED disc player. So I had to get one of those, which I did when I was working at a video store called Video Space. We had one we had multiple stores, but we had one CED player in downtown Seattle that nobody ever rented. So they sold it to me for $50 in I want to say 83, 84. And the only reason that I got it was to get On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And my friend Mike Schertz and I were James Bond fanatics. And he used to bring his RCA VFT 650 to my house. And we would daisy chain our VCRs, our VHS players together. They were great, state of the art. They destroyed any kind of copy protection. And I would get a stack of tapes and we'd rent tapes and record them. We'd make 2 copies of each, and all the James Bond movies. And then, of course, Laserdisc came out, and MGM Laserdiscs would upgrade, and they did special editions of the James Bond movies that were all letterboxed. Then, of course, you had to buy them again on DVD and again on Blu-ray. And unfortunately, they did not release a James Bond box set on 4K. You can get the Daniel Craig movies, but you cannot get any of the other Bond films on 4K. And you probably never will now that Amazon owns MGM. So my relationship with the Bond franchise goes back to the time I was a little kid. And, to me, they were omnipresent, ever present. What is omnipresent? But they were all ever present. They were always there for me when I was growing up. And obviously, Corgi out of the UK. Corgi made, of course, the die-cast Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger with the ejector seat. I had the Moon Buggy from Diamonds Are Forever. Corgi made a Moonraker shuttle. They made other Bond cars as well. And hell, right now I'm building a 1/8 scale. 1/8 scale? Is it 1/16? 1/8. Maybe it's 1/8. I'm building a 1/8 scale. I can't reach it, but I'm building a 1/8 scale Lotus Esprit submarine car, the Lotus Esprit submarine from Spy Who Loved Me from Agora Models. It's you get parts every month and they send it to you. And so I'm building that. It's right over there. So, you never get rid of the James Bond bug. But the thing is, what's really interesting is I've noticed that as I've gotten older, if you weren't indoctrinated as a kid into Bond, if you weren't watching it on TV and you were older, again, I'm an old man shouting at clouds, but the Bond franchise did not permeate your soul the way it did to us kids who are children of the 70s watching Bond on TV. Because once the advent of cable came in and there was more choices, and especially home video, when people weren't locked in, we watched what was put in front of us. You know, we didn't have a choice. On Sunday night, the only thing to watch was James Bond. That was it. And that's kind of what it was. It was drilled inside of you. And then if you were a fan, the home video era allowed you to become a student of the Bond franchise. But luckily, up until 1989, James Bond movies were coming out in the theater every year. So after Spy Who Loved Me, which was 77, which came out just 2 months after Star Wars was released, that was a great summer. Capricorn 1 too, woohoo! So that was those are some good gets at the movie theaters. You got Star Wars, you got Spy Who Loved Me, you got Capricorn 1. I'm telling you, all three of those movies were Capricorn 1. I just recently picked up the double disc set from Imprint in Australia that had taken off a Japanese print of Capricorn 1. The only way it has a scene I'd never seen before. I saw that movie in 77. I've owned it in multiple different formats, and I get the Blu-ray from Australia. Was it this year? No, it was the end of 2024, and there was something new to see in Capricorn 1. You know, that's why we live in a wondrous age where things never get old, and there's more to see all the time. What that says about me, I don't know. It's funny, being a kid, my mom used to joke that I like the same things that I've liked since I was a little boy. And that's true. I cannot tell a lie. It's, the same things. James Bond, Star Trek, pretty girls, what the heck? You like the same stuff you do as a kid, Do you grow older? I don't know. I know I'm supposed to put childish things away, but James Bond wasn't childish. None of the things I like were childish. It was all about becoming an adult, but still loving those things the way you loved them when you were a kid. Now, the James Bond films, let's be honest, they're not exactly, they're not great. A lot of them are just not great. They're good, but they're not great. I would say that obviously the Bond films were based on Fleming's novels, but they're a mixed bag. And in the 60s, I was talking about this earlier today, in the 60s, the Bond films they set the tone. No one had ever seen movies quite like that. And you have to remember, they were focused, they were directed toward men that had come back from World War II, and they basically started the American middle class, in the 50s. They nested with their significant others. They raised families. And when you got to 1962 and Goldfinger came out, we're less than 20 years away from the end of World War II. And many of these young men were now in their late 30s, maybe, and going into their 40s. And a lot of them were war veterans. And the world had sort of changed moving into the 60s. It was that Mad Men, Mrs. Maisel era, where you were going from the beat generation and the bebop generation, jazz from the 50s, Elvis, rock and roll, all that. Then you had Playboy clubs. And what the Bond films represented was a life that most people couldn't have. Most people still weren't traveling across the Pacific or the Atlantic in transcontinental flights, in airliners. A lot of men hadn't even been in things like that. Most people hadn't either. And the James Bond films were wish fulfillment. James Bond was out there drinking shaken, not stirred martinis. He was getting laid by the most beautiful women, coming up against the most dangerous men with his gadgets and his amazing cars. It was wish fulfillment of the First Order. And then, of course, the world changed at the end of the 60s. I mean, the last 60s Bond film was On Her Majesty's Secret Service, one of my favorite Bond movies. And as you moved into the 70s, you had the tumult of civil rights and the assassinations of Martin Luther King, the Kennedy brothers. You had American cities burning. You had Vietnam, all kinds of crazy upheaval. And by the time you moved into the 70s, the world had sort of moved on from Bond. And Bond was now, instead of setting trends, the Bond films were chasing trends. Live and Let Die was heavily inspired by blaxploitation movies that were all the rage. Man with the Golden Gun had a martial arts flavor because we started, Bruce Lee movies, Game of Death, that kind of thing was popularized. And then by the time you get to 1977 and 1979 for Moonraker, Bond had gotten full-on fantasy with underwater cities and orbital space bases and volcano-launched space shuttles. Even when I was a kid, look, Moonraker came out in the summer of 1979. I'm going to tell you, I fucking loved it. Not just because Corinne Clary, who had previously starred in the story of O, look it up, people. Not just because Corinne Clary was in it, or that Lois Childs played Dr. Holly Goodhead, but the fact that somebody built an actual launch facility for space shuttles somewhere in the Amazon basin. That must have been a construction project no one would have been interested in. All the Russian satellites, hey, what are they building down there? You just rolled with it. It was fine. But by the time you got into the 80s, I mean, even Bond needed a reboot. They brought Bond down to earth with For Your Eyes Only, and you had Bill Conti doing the music score and Sheena Easton singing the theme song. That was another thing. Bond was always had music cooking. I mean, Paul McCartney and Wings did Live and Let Die, and George Martin, the Beatles producer, he was the one who made the score, did the score for that. And that was just another aspect. By the way, for those of you who want to know what my favorite Bond tune is, look, I can say Goldfinger, which you love that stuff. You grew up with it. But I'm going to give you a controversial choice from Quantum of Solace, Another Way to Die, Jack White and Alicia Keys. That is by far my favorite Bond theme, and it always winds up on the list of worst Bond themes. You people are crazy. That is a down and dirty grind. I love that. I don't know why people don't like it. I thought that was a great choice. Probably the best thing about Quantum of Solace, even though I am a Quantum of Solace apologist. I am. But then Bond films became ordinary. We were used to global travel. There were all kinds of action films that were being made that sort of, Bond still was Bond, but, they didn't have 24-hour day shows like they did when Goldfinger opened, and they didn't have James Bond double features in the theaters. They could re-release Bond movies, and you could have a Bondathon if you wanted to, which my friends and I frequently did on physical media. But the Bond franchise changed. And then when it went away in 89, and I have to say, License to Kill is, unfortunately, Timothy Dalton deserved better. I really like Living Daylights, but License to Kill is not a particularly great movie, and it doesn't have a particularly great Michael Kamen score, and the theme song's only okay. Gladys Knight, it's kind of smoky and sultry, but and it came out in the summer of 1989, which, aside from Tim Burton's Batman, was one of the most disappointing summers of all time. And don't you tell me that Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was good. I know. It's like look, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Return of the Jedi belong in the same drawer, and they need to be put away, and people have to stop exalting those movies. Ghostbusters 2, Star Trek 5, other than Tim Burton's Batman, and let's face it, that was only okay. Just saying. But as we moved, then Bond went away for 6 years. So, from 62 to 89, that's a pretty good run. And Bond was still out there kicking, and just so people know, I was in high school and I had to review A View to a Kill for my high school newspaper, and I hated it. I called A View to a Kill in my high school newspaper boring. I did not like A View to a Kill. Great John Barry score, though, and kick-ass Duran Duran theme tune. Great song. Dance into the Fire. That Fatal Kiss. But that movie was not good. Literally, Bond, I hate to say it, Roger Moore was a little long in the tooth. Christopher Walken was fun. It was great to see, Grace Jones in the movie, because I was a huge Grace Jones fan. Shout out to ZTT and Trevor Horn and Slave to the Rhythm, I loved her album Nightclubbing. Pull up to the bumper, baby, but not with A View to a Kill, because it ain't good. But then, we got Timothy Dalton, and people loved his portrayal of Bond, even though he had a really bad haircut in License to Kill. which License to Kill was kind of a glorified Miami Vice episode, although you had Carrie Lowell and Talisa Soto, two succulent Bond girls, gotta say, and Wayne Newton's in it. And so's Robert Davi, and so is Benicio del Toro. The movie should have been much better than it was. And then we didn't have Bond for 6 years. And during that time, I had moved to California, and I was living in my 20s, young adulthood, moving into my career, trying to do things, and Bond left me. Bond left me for 6 years. Bond was gone. Gone from my life. Anyway, and then we had 4 Pierce Brosnan era Bonds, and then we had the modern Bond, Daniel Craig, who has one hell of a banger first movie. Casino Royale gives us the origin of James Bond, and there's not a lot of continuity between the Bond movies, but if you want to kind of watch them with a vague continuity, Casino Royale would be the first Bond film. That film is terrific. Once again, they brought back Martin Campbell to direct that film. He directed GoldenEye. He reinvented Bond for Pierce Brosnan and reinvented Bond for Daniel Craig. But then, as what happened in the 70s, the entire Craig era became playing catch-up to other movies. The Dark Knight heavily influenced Skyfall. Everyone loves Skyfall. It made $1 billion at the box office. I did not. It's beautifully shot by Roger Deakins. It has a great Adele theme song. Daniel Kleinman, one of the great things that they did was they kept Daniel Kleinman after his amazing opening credits for GoldenEye. Why Mark Forrester replaced him in Quantum of Solace with some weird company, I don't know. But Daniel Kleinman's opening credits, he redefined what Maurice Binder had done in all the Bond films up to GoldenEye. GoldenEye was the first time we saw Daniel Kleinman's opening credits, and they are, beautiful. Chef's kiss. You go, Daniel Kleinman. I wish I could make a movie someday and use you and have you do the opening credits. Maybe one day we can. But anyway, the Daniel Craig era, I mean, I think that Spectre and especially No Time to Die are especially lackluster. Unfortunately, this idea of trying to give them some kind of continuity and Christoph Waltz to be Blofeld was great, but then cuckoo, that what? Just not good. And so while people like Daniel Craig as Bond, it's because they really haven't seen very many Bond movies. But that's okay. I understand the whole modern era of Bond plays into what modern sensibilities are like. But to me, Skyfall is them chasing the Dark Knight. And it's a movie where James Bond fails the entire movie. And you've got a great villain in Silva that his villainy makes no sense. He gets to London and suddenly he knows how to... All the London tubes are in his fingertips, and he has an untold number of minions, even though he's an ex-00 and used to work for M. I don't know. But anyway, there's an article I want to read before I go further. As you might have guessed, I have a number of articles I want to read. This one comes from Medium, and I thought it was pretty good. And it's by Subhanker S. Singh. 007, James Bond. This is actually the article is called The Evolution of James Bond, Past, Present, and Future, and it was published in Medium on October 31st, Halloween 2023. James Bond, this iconic secret agent, has been captivating audiences for over half a century, evolving with the times, yet staying true to the essence of sophistication, adventure, and intrigue. He's been featured in over 25 films. Now, when I say that, Never Say Never Again, which came out in 1983, by the way, the same year as Octopussy did. Never Say Never Again is not an official Bond film. It is a remake of Thunderball, produced by Kevin McClory, directed by, get this, Irvin Kershner, coming off of Empire Strikes Back, and really has a terrible score. Michel Legrand who did the incredible Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and a terrible song, but it did have Kim Basinger and it did have Klaus Maria Brandauer in it. Bond plays a video game. I don't know. It's got some, and I will say this, Barbara Carrera is Fatima Blush. I mean, when she asks him, one of my favorite scenes in a Bond film, when she says after they've slept together that she wants him to write down that the greatest rapture of his life was afforded to him on a boat in Nassau by Fatima Blush. And Sean Connery looks up and looks at her and says that agents can't give out endorsements. Come on. I mean, there's a lot of love to be had in Never Say Never Again, but not a great Bond film, not an official Bond film either. And remember, the first time, here's a question for you. How many times has Casino Royale been filmed? If you've watched me in the last couple of days, you'd know 3. And the first time it was actually filmed was for American television with Barry Nelson playing James Bond, or Jimmy Bond, as we know him, and Peter Lorre playing Le Chiffre, that was played by Hannibal, of course, in Casino Royale by Mads Mikkelsen. And then, of course, there's a Bond parody called Casino Royale that came out in the late 60s. I think 67, maybe? Was it 60? I'm not sure. Woody Allen, David Niven, and check it out. But anyway, let me get back to this. He's been featured in over 25 films, starting with Dr. No in 1962. The James Bond franchise has grossed over $7.8 billion worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing film franchises of all time. Yes, I know, Marvel dwarfs that now. And now he's going to take you through a journey to speculate on the future of the James Bond franchise. The past. Here's Ian Fleming. In the early 1950s, the world was introduced to James Bond through the mind of British writer Ian Fleming. Fleming wrote 12 novels and 2 short story collections about James Bond before his death in 1964. Here's, of course, Sir Thomas Sean Connery as James Bond from Dr. No. In 1962, the world was introduced to a cinematic icon, James Bond, the suave and sophisticated spy portrayed by Sean Connery in Dr. No. Connery's Bond set the standard for all future portrayals of the character, embodying his charm, wit, and effortless panache. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Connery starred in a string of classic Bond films, including Goldfinger, Thunderball, and Diamonds Are Forever. His adventures defined the franchise's identity, and his portrayal of Bond became synonymous with cool and sophistication. Connery's Bond was a man of impeccable style and taste. He was always dressed to the nines with a tailored suit and a martini in hand. His portrayal of James Bond was a defining moment in cinema history. His Bond is the epitome of cool, calm, and collected. And here, of course, we have George Lazenby and Diana Rigg, one of my favorite Bond girls, by the way. George Lazenby was the second actor to portray James Bond, playing the character in one movie, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. He was cast after Sean Connery left the role, and he was chosen due to his rugged good looks, athleticism, and resemblance to Connery. Lazenby's tenure as Bond was short-lived as he declined to return for subsequent films. However, his portrayal of Bond is unique in a number of ways. For one thing, Lazenby is the only Australian actor to play Bond, and he brought a new and different energy to the role. He was also the first Bond actor to have a truly vulnerable side, as his character falls in love and actually gets married in the film, which doesn't end well. Lazenby's Bond is also more complex than previous Bonds. He's not simply a one-dimensional action hero. He's also a man with feelings, nothing more than feelings, and emotions, and he is capable of making mistakes. The 1970s saw a change in the actor portraying Bond, with Roger Moore taking over the mantle of the charismatic spy. Moore's portrayal of the iconic spy was more sophisticated and urbane than that of his predecessors, reflecting the changing social and cultural mores of the time. Moore starred in 7 Bond films, more than any other actor. His debut film, Live and Let Die, was a critical and commercial success, introducing audiences to his charming and witty take on the character. However, not all of his Bond films were met with critical acclaim. Some of his later films, such as Moonraker and Octopussy, were criticized for their over-the-top action sequences and campy humor. Despite the mixed critical reception to some of his Bond films, Moore's legacy as 007 is secure. You know, as an aside, Maud Adams played the primary Bond girl in 2 of Moore's films, the first being Man with the Golden Gun and the second being Octopussy, the titular Octopussy from Octopussy. Or as I like to call it, an 8-sided kind of love. Some of his later films were criticized. Despite the mixed critical reception to some of his Bond movies, Moore's legacy as 007 is secure. And then we have Timothy Dalton here. The dawn of the 1980s saw Timothy Dalton take over the role of James Bond. Well, I'm sorry, it was not the dawn of the 1980s. It was 1987, to be exact. See, people should do their research when they write this shit. That's why I can't trust modern film criticism or film analysis. The dawn of the 1980s, first of all, For Your Eyes Only was 81. A View to a Kill was, or Octopussy was 83. A View to a Kill was 85. It wasn't until Living Daylights. There had been 3 previous Bond films, and there was only 2 Timothy Dalton Bond films in the 80s. And it was not at the dawn of the 80s. So anyway, Dalton's Bond was a complex and multifaceted character. He was tough, intelligent, and resourceful. He was also deeply flawed and haunted by his past. Dalton brought a sense of gravitas and realism to the role that had been missing from previous Bond films. Dalton's portrayal of Bond was a refreshing departure from the campy and over-the-top style of the Roger Moore era. And here we have Pierce Brosnan. Pierce Brosnan's ascension to the role of James Bond in the 1990s revitalized the franchise with a sophisticated blend of classic charisma and modern action. His debut film GoldenEye was a critical and commercial success, seemingly transitioning Bond into the post-Cold War era. And, of course, GoldenEye gave us the, first of all, M, Judi Dench's M, who said the immortal words, "You're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War," which is one of the great problems that Bond has. Brosnan's portrayal of Bond was a perfect blend of old and new. He brought a timeless sense of sophistication and panache to the role, while also imbuing Bond with a modern edge. Brosnan's Bond was a man of action, but he was also suave, intelligent, and witty. He was the perfect embodiment of the quintessential British gentleman spy. His 4 Bond films were all commercial and critical successes. Well, maybe not Die Another Day. And they helped to revitalize the franchise for a new generation of fans. And here you go, modern Bond, looking pretty good from Quantum of Solace. The 21st century marked a new era for the James Bond franchise. Look at that guy. He looked great, I'll tell you that. With the arrival of Daniel Craig as the iconic spy. By the way, people didn't like him at first because he had blue eyes and blonde hair. James Bond can't have that. Craig's portrayal of Bond was a departure from the suave and sophisticated Bond of previous decades. His Bond was more rugged, intense, and emotionally vulnerable. Yeah, because that's what we want in Bond. I'm so sad. Oh, being 007 so hard. Oh, I got shot off a train. I'm going to go play drinking games on the beach with a scorpion. Whatever. Craig's debut film, Casino Royale, was a critical and commercial success, redefining the Bond character for a new generation. Craig's Bond was a more complex and nuanced character than his predecessors, capable of great violence and great compassion. He was also a more physically imposing Bond with a muscular build and a commanding presence. His subsequent Bond films, such as Skyfall and Spectre, continued to explore the darker and more introspective side of the character. Who cares? Craig's Bond was a man haunted by his past and struggling to find his place in the world. Craig's portrayal of James Bond was a critical and commercial success. His films grossed over $4 billion worldwide, making him the most successful Bond actor of all time. One of the reasons why Bond has been so successful is that it has managed to stay relevant over the years. The movies have always been able to capture the zeitgeist of their time, whether it was the Cold War era or the post-9/11 world. Now he goes into the present. The release of the most recent James Bond film, No Time to Die, in 2021, was a momentous event for fans of the iconic franchise. I wanted it to be. I was very excited. It had been delayed for a long, long time. The film was a commercial success, grossing over $774 million worldwide. However, it was also bittersweet as it marked Daniel Craig's final outing as the suave and sophisticated British spy. Again, the break between No Time to Die and now is now the second longest break the Bond franchise has had since 1962 without a James Bond movie. With Craig's departure, the future of James Bond is uncertain. There have been rumors that Tom Hardy or Idris Elba might take on the role, but nothing has been confirmed yet. Whoever does end up succeeding Craig will have big shoes to fill. After all, Craig has been widely praised for his portrayal of Bond, which is both rugged and refined, intelligent and resourceful, charming and witty. Here you have Henry Cavill, Idris Elba, Tom Hardy, and Aaron Taylor-Johnson, all people at one point or another have been talked about in the role of Bond. I like the idea of Richard Madden, especially after seeing Rob Stark, after seeing Bodyguard. There are a number of actors that fit the description, but some of the most popular contenders include Tom Hardy, Idris Elba, Henry Cavill, and Aaron Taylor-Johnson. Hardy is known for his rugged good looks and intense screen presence, while Idris Elba is a charismatic and versatile actor who has proven himself in a wide range of roles. Cavill, on the other hand, is classically handsome and charming, who would bring a new level of sophistication to the role, and Aaron Taylor-Johnson appears to be the frontrunner. Taylor-Johnson has the good looks, the suave demeanor, and the acting chops to convincingly inhabit the role of 007. He's also relatively unknown to the general public, which would work in his favor. Unlike some of the other contenders, he is not associated with any other major franchise characters. Well, he is now. Apart from a short stint as the Quicksilver in the MCU, which would allow him to bring a fresh perspective to that role. People forget he was Quicksilver. I don't. I have his hot toy. Ultimately, the decision of who will play the next James Bond is up to the producers. However, one thing is for sure, whoever is chosen will have to step into some very big shoes. The cinematic future of James Bond is shrouded in uncertainty, but there are a few discernible trends that we can expect to see in the forthcoming films. Firstly, we can anticipate an increased emphasis on diversity in the casting of the character. Calls for a female or non-white actor to take on the role of 007 have grown in volume and intensity in recent years, and it's likely that the producers will eventually accede to these demands. Secondly, we can expect future Bond films to focus more on technology. The world has transformed dramatically since the release of the first Bond film in '62, and the technological advancement has played a major role in this transformation. It is therefore reasonable to expect future Bond films to reflect this technological advancement, with the titular character utilizing cutting-edge gadgets and weaponry to complete his missions. In addition to these two trends, we can also expect future Bond films to maintain the franchise's signature elements of style and sophistication. Bond is renowned for his impeccable taste in everything from clothing to cocktails, and we can expect future films to continue to showcase this aspect of the character. Similarly, Bond films are also known for their lavish locations and action sequences, and we can expect future films to raise the bar even higher in these areas. Overall, the future of James Bond is promising. The franchise is one of the most popular and successful in film history, and it is clear that there is still a strong demand for Bond films. With the right casting decisions and creative vision, future Bond films can continue to entertain and enthrall audiences for many years to come. Certainly. Well, now, here's something that I mean, obviously, the James Bond films have been a favorite of mine since I was a kid, as I went into a long-winded diatribe about earlier on this show. But I think the question needs to be asked. How does James Bond work in our age today? Nowadays, you have people going all over the world taking pictures and uploading them to Instagram almost instantaneously. Is there any place in the world that we haven't seen? If you haven't been there yourself, you can see umpteen videos or photographs about wherever the most, I mean, you name it. Whether you're geo-tracking something or whatever, you can find any place that anybody's ever gone to now. The world is no longer mysterious. No place on Earth is exotic anymore. There's no place that James Bond can go to that we haven't seen, that's going to be surprising, that's going to be at all, I don't know, interesting to see depicted on film. I mean, look, I would say, or digitally captured on an Alexa, whatever you want to call it. That's a big problem, because one of the great things about the Bond movies is, where do you go? They would actually go to places and film them, you know, the Lotus Esprit, whether they went to like Sardinia, coming out of the water, you know, whether they would go up to Montenegro to the Casino Royale. I mean, call it what you want. Where does Bond go? Where does he go? Where are his adventures going to be set? I mean, even as a kid, when Bond went to see Jimmy Dean in Vegas, I'm like, really? I mean, really? Vegas? Speaking of that, people are like, well, did he go to Vegas? He did. I've got another ABC Sunday night movie clip that I want to play for you.
Live marathon coverage begins Sunday at 9. Benson and the greatest American hero won't be seen tonight.
I don't believe it.
But they'll return soon. Now stay tuned for the following special presentation.
Although edited for television, some parents may consider this James Bond film unsuitable for younger family members. Viewer discretion is advised. Tonight,
Who are you?
James Bond.
Sean Connery is back as the best Bond ever.
Isn't it customary to grant a condemned man his last request?
You've asked for this.
Staying one jump ahead of his most ruthless rival.
I think you've made your point, Goldfinger. Thank you for the demonstration.
And never getting burned.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Finger.
Shocking.
You know, I have an almost Pavlovian response to that opening, that, you know, airport movies, earthquake. You know, I think it's on NBC or something. But, man, I hear that. I just love it. Now, before I get into this, there's a lot of people that are firing in all kinds of super chats and things. So I'm gonna let me read what you guys have to say. First of all, George the Giant Slayer. I'll hail my brother from another mother. Always love hearing your poignant insights on the latest insanities or the next boundary-breaking imagination connoisseur. Wishing you the best. Well, George, that's very nice of you to say. And I guess I'll see you Sunday. Neural Ilyana says, Brave, that's a cool name, Neural Ilyana. Brave New World is lukewarm box office. What if Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four both are also lukewarm? What would Marvel Studios do if that happens? Ooh, I don't know. I think that you know, we were talking about that today on the John Campea show. I think, and we were going through the top second weekend drop-offs of the MCU, and it's all post-Endgame movies. And look, as I said on John's show today, I think one of the problems with the MCU now is none of the films are going places. There's no interconnecting. Now, I'm not saying that you needed that, but one of the things that created excitement amongst the audience was we all knew that we were watching a much larger story unfolding before us. And from the very first MCU movie, which was Iron Man, we knew with Nick Fury that we were going to get the Avengers. And we could see all the parts, and it was exciting. And as it percolated and went along, some Marvel movies were better than others. Obviously, Captain America, the first Avenger, leading into Winter Soldier, leading into Civil War, or as we like to call it, Avengers 2.0, was really exciting. Even sort of off-brand, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies worked. The Thor movies, you get to Ragnarok, that was a lot of fun. And the problem now is the MCU films feel, all of the MCU, and I blame a lot of this, I think, has to do with Disney Plus. It feels incredibly disjointed. And when the Marvel Cinematic Universe feels disjointed, it feels like they don't know what they're doing. And look, I like Anthony Mackie a great deal as a performer. I think he's great, and I like him in the role of Captain America. I mean, look, Steve Rogers is off the table. So, and Bucky Barnes is not going to be, I mean, the guy was an assassin for longer than he was even an American soldier. So that's problematic. And I like the idea of Mackie as Captain America. I just don't think he was in a Frankenstein movie that was less about him than a sequel to The Hulk from 17 years ago. And he didn't really have, look, the new Falcon I really liked. And Carl Lumbly was an MVP. Those three guys should have been the focus of a movie. Should have been the focus of who knows what's going on. And if you wanted to make it more Marvel-centric and more interesting, why wasn't Wakanda a player? Why wasn't it's not the Atlanteans, but why wasn't Namor a player? Why didn't you make an MCU movie? Why do you have, we have a problem with adamantium, so it's France, India, and Japan? And apparently China doesn't exist. I mean, I thought that the Brave New World script really let Sam Wilson down, and it let everybody else down. And the question that you asked, if Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four don't perform, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is in real trouble. The Daredevil series is not going to help it, as good as that might be. The MCU lives and dies on the big screen, and we're supposed to be excited about Doomsday? Why? Doomsday for whom? I mean, who are the Avengers? I don't know. You know, and I think the excitement we've now seen, there's a lot of movies now in the MCU post Endgame where the end of phases 1, 2, and 3, it ended with Far From Home. That was the 23rd MCU movie. And then phase 4 began with Black Widow, which is an inconsequential movie, the TV shows, and we've had now we have 35 Marvel movies. And the last 10, where are they going? Where do we go now? I don't know. So I think Marvel is in real trouble if those movies don't perform. Maybe they will. Thomas Logan asks, did you watch either or both Reb Brown Captain America TV movies? I did, as they aired on 79 on CBS. Were kids talking about them? They were not. Were you watching Bixby's Hulk? Yeah, everybody watched those things, but they didn't have... I mean, kids watch them. You talk to various kids on the playground, but not every kid watched that stuff. Not every kid liked comic book movies. Now the world is completely different. When I was a kid, some of my friends, a fraction of them, read comics. Most kids didn't. They really didn't. Nerdy things were... We now live in a world where we geeks and imagination connoisseurs, we won. The entire world became the sci-fi world we dreamed of. And it began with the advent of the home computer. And as things moved through from the 80s into the 90s, into the aughts, into the teens, now into the 20s, the world completely changed. And now the things that I was in the closet about, my love of Star Trek and Star Wars and science fiction and comics, it's now mainstream, all of it. It was not like that back then. Although, to be fair, people liked Wonder Woman. You watched it, but it wasn't like there was no religious fervor around it. But people liked it, but it was all kinds of entertainment. Most of the kids I know watch sitcoms. I was never a sitcom kid, really, but I watched a few. Jason Fox has been a member for 12 months. Cornelio says Brosnan's TV contract altered everything. Yeah, well, he was Remington Steele, so he couldn't take over as Bond when they wanted him to. So he didn't, but he did eventually get to become Bond, so that was good. D's Webos has been a member for 28 months. Thanks a lot for that. Disaster Area just sent in his 20th Super Chat. 007 could be great in this era. There's a proxy war with Russia. There's OnlyFans girls. There's billionaires and WAF groups controlling society behind the scenes. Nothing has changed. Well, yeah, I mean, that's true. Maybe. I think that's the real hard thing. The real problem is that James Bond is fighting for Western civilization, specifically the crown. And are people going to believe in that? I mean, we have half of our youth hates the United States. And it is, look, James Bond is deeply patriotic when it comes to, my God, what's Bond doing? He's keeping the British end up, sir. You know, we have to instill, I mean, I can see them trying to make James Bond some international agent fighting for everyone, but he is a product of the UK. And the world, people do not look upon we had the post-war world where the Western civilization saved the planet from great evil. And that has been chipped away. And I think it's really difficult to give Bond the identity. That's another one of the big problems that I think the character has. Can James Bond, who's intrinsically British, be British? And I think if you take that out of him, he's no longer James Bond. But corporate thinking doesn't believe in fealty to those kinds of things. And it's too bad. The one thing that the Broccoli family did, for better or for worse, they didn't allow innovation. They stuck with a formula. And again, they were always looking, I mean, Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, who are half brother and sister, they were looking at trends and they were following them. Bond was a follower since Live and Let Die. And Bond never was a trendsetter ever again. And the Mission Impossible movies, the Bourne movies, they out-bonded Bond, unfortunately. And look, I think one of the great problems with James Bond is he doesn't ski. He was on skis in The World Is Not Enough, but it wasn't a great ski scene. And he snowboarded at the beginning of A View to a Kill. But you know, even our world doesn't look at skiing the way it used to, which is too bad. Because when I was a kid, that's when I learned to ski. I learned to ski because of James Bond. And we don't have that anymore. Carlos Lima said, happy birthday, RMB. I wish you were in charge of Disney Star Wars. Well, thank you. I would certainly straighten it up. Although I will say, aside from the Steve Earle song in the Andor trailer, if you turn the sound off, or as we were saying, put any other piece of music over that trailer, it's pretty impressive. It looks like a Star Wars movie. I mean, shot in real locations. God bless him. God bless that wheat field. Great stuff. Carlos has also been a member of the channel for 13 months. Jason Webster sends in a super chat and says, for many years, the Bond franchise was the very epitome of the best escapist entertainment. They created trends instead of chasing them. Yes, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. That's what Bond did. Deez Webo says Cannonball Run 2 introduced me to Bond. Well, at least you didn't say Never Too Young to Die, a movie that has Vanity in it, but it also has George Lazenby. By the way, shout out to The Last Dragon. Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon. Shout out to Vanity. God bless you. Thomas Bennett says, how is The Last Crusade less than good? I'm intrigued. Well, if you look on this channel and you look up whining about movies, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, the lovely Elizabeth Gwendolyn Bell and myself go into that, and I will tell you how much I really don't like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. I know. And then people are like, but look, man, you got to understand, I was there when Raiders of the Lost Ark opened. And I think Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade is a goof. And I think what they did to Denholm Elliott and Sala was kind of criminal. And you can tell that they were making up the big tank chase at the end. Steven Spielberg admitted to that. It's kind of free-flowing. I do like the end of the movie where you meet the Grail Knight. But I'll tell you something. You want to know the big problem with that movie? It was Indiana Jones who should have been shot, and it should have been Sean Connery who brought the Grail out and saved his son's life, and he replaces the Grail Knight. Just saying. I mean, yeah, we got that great walking away into the sunset on horseback. That was all good. That's where it should have ended, but just me. Wind Goddess has been a member for 52 months. Wow, Wind Goddess. I need a Wind Goddess to blow in my life. Just whoosh. 52 months. Thank you for such support. That's very nice. Thomas Logan said, you forgot to list one Bond film, 1996's The Rock. It is top 5 for me in the 007 saga. Connery Bond, abandoned in Alcatraz since the 60s, is fucking gold. That is apocryphal at best, even though there's a argument to be made that that's supposed to be Connery. I would dare say that really The Hunt for Red October could be a Bond film too, but Marco Ramius should be James Bond. Jason Webster says the age of actors as they debut as Bond. Sean Connery was 31. George Lazenby was 29. Roger Moore was 45. Timothy Dalton was 41. Pierce Brosnan is 41. And Daniel Craig is 37 when they debut as Bond. It'll be interesting to see what they do and who they pick. Eric Ritter sends in a super chat and says, hey, Rob, I'm an actor in Colorado who's been having some pretty good success in the last 2 years in commercials. Been wondering about your thoughts on the craft of acting and if you've ever acted. Thanks. I wanted to be an actor at one point, like in elementary school. I starred in The Pirates of Penzance. I am the very pattern of a modern major general. I did sing that song. And I've acted a little bit in things here and there. I've done some voices for True Noir. But I really respect the craft of acting. And great actors there's nothing better. I will tell you as an actor yourself, for anybody who's trying to audition somebody for a part, there is nothing better than to watch an actor come in and take words on a page and elevate them beyond what you ever thought they could be. That's what everybody wants. And everybody, when you walk into an audition, everybody in that room wants you to be great. They want you to nail it. They're on your side. A lot of actors get all nervous and stuff. Just know that. I love the craft of acting. Acting is what makes movies and television great. And I'll tell you something. I mean, having been directing, it's just an audio drama, but it's pure acting. If you want to listen to True Noir, I have been afforded an incredible cast that we went out and got, a bespoke cast that most of it was handpicked by me and my supervising producer, Christine Sheeks. And I'll tell you something. Listen to Michael Rosenbaum as our star, Nathan Heller. You can tell he just gets it. And he's one of the finest actors, and I've been on lots of big sets covering them from a documentary perspective as a special features producer. And I've seen a lot of different actors with a lot of different abilities. And I have to say that a guy like Michael Rosenbaum is a gem, truly. All the actors in True Noir were fantastic to work with. But stick with it, man. Congratulations, and don't give up. We're going to need actors, especially in the AI age. B Things says, I just want them to release the unaltered Bond novels again. For better or for worse, I want to read them for what they really are and not what fretful 2020 sensitivity readers think they ought to be. Well, luckily, B Things, you can still get the Bond novels that are unchanged in many different forms. So they're all still out there. You can still find them. And I agree. I mean, James Bond, look, when you're a secret agent, and every day could be your last. The thing about James Bond is he loves being alive, and his appetites are second to none. He drives the best cars, he eats the best caviar, he drinks the best champagne, he fucks the best ladies. Why wouldn't you? Because why would you waste your time on anything else if every moment could be your last? And that's the ultimate wish fulfillment. But you know what? Nowadays, that kind of masculinity, there's something wrong with it. Well, let me tell you, without that kind of Bond masculinity, the world would have been destroyed how many times over? The 2 nukes that were stolen in Thunderball probably would have gone off, setting off World War III. Certainly, Carl Stromberg's idea of starting a conflict between Russia and America in The Spy Who Loved Me, those missiles, they probably would have gone off because Bond would have been dead or somebody would have canceled him. Hugo Drax's idea of using orchids to poison the entire population of the Earth so he could repopulate it with his Aryan astronauts. Come on. Over and over again. Toxic masculinity. There's no such thing. There's only Bond. And without his masculinity, we wouldn't be here. So there you go. B Things also goes on to say, GoldenEye has several things going for it. 1, Sean Bean dies twice. 2, coincidentally, I have a blue BMW Z3 like Bond briefly drives in the movie. Nice. That's pretty cool. I like that car. The car is very cool. Claudius, our friend Claudius, when is disclosure? Claudius says the box office speaks. Adjusted for inflation, Skyfall earned $1.5 billion. You have to go back to 1965 to find the second highest grossing Thunderball. Yeah, if you want to watch another whining about movies, you can see Claudius debating the merits of Skyfall with us. So look that up. Aren't you in Hawaii now or something, dude? You're living the Bond life. Claudius is the closest thing I know to James Bond, just saying. Royston S. Bailey says, do you think we'll see more $50 million budgeted films? We should. So far my favorite movie I've seen this year is Companion, and that was $10 million. It's now available. If you haven't seen Companion, do yourself a favor and go watch it. It's a hoot. It lives up to what it's supposed to be. Remember, you're watching it at scale. But really, it doesn't matter how much a movie costs. It depends how much entertainment it delivers. And the problem is nobody knows how to make great $50 million movies anymore. Brian McCann says the Kingsman films have replaced James Bond, in my humble opinion. Yeah, but the thing about the Kingsman movies is there's not a lot of, it's silly to say this, but they're much more, they take place in a much more fantastical realm. I loved Sam Jackson's villain character. I pretty much wanted him to win in the first Kingsman, but that's not a man from real life. He's the Kingsman movies are caricatures. But I like them a lot. I do like them, especially the first one. Really like the first one a great deal. And Brian McCann became an imagination connoisseur. Well, thank you for that. Claudius says, reimagining James Bond, a current-day spy, would work like Mr. Robot's Elliot. Elliot is a more realistic modern-day operative. Elliot is more hacker, social engineer, and saboteur. I agree with you. To be honest, I don't think that James Bond works today. Not as he was imagined by Ian Fleming. Because he really is a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War. I mean, he really is that. So how do you get past that? I don't know. It's tough. And we're going to get to that, the reinvention of Bond. Super Showgirl asked, do you think going forward Sam will get the super soldier serum? I love your channel. You are your Marvel and DC depth makes you the perfect advisor for Feige, in all honesty. Well, you know what? That's very nice. First of all, Super Showgirl, I love that name. That's very nice of you to say. The problem that I have is that I don't have enough credibility to work at that level. I mean, I've been eking out my meager indie world stuff that I put out, whether it's Tango Shalom, a.k.a. Forbidden Tango, White Devils that we have coming out, True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, which, by the way, I'd put up against anything in terms of quality and storytelling because the script is incredible. But I'm never going to be able to. I just nobody would. I just haven't worked at that level, unfortunately. And you kind of have to earn your way. And I have people are always saying that I'm jealous because I'm not jealous of anything. I've been able to stay in my lane and do what I do, and it'd be a lot of fun. But and I'm having a lot of fun. But I mean, would it be? Look, I was extremely happy to see Terry Matalas get tapped to be the showrunner for the Vision series. Now, I don't know. I haven't spoken to Terry. He knows better than to tell me anything about the Vision series. Believe me, I have a big mouth. Everybody knows that. But I do think that they've picked the right guy. You know, people forget that before the MCU started, Kevin Feige worked as a producer on 14 Marvel movies before the MCU. 14. The last one being Brett Leonard's Man-Thing. People always forget about that one. But yeah, he did. So he knows. And, you know, he came up, he worked for Richard Donner. And I think there's nobody better than to shepherd the MCU. And Feige, I used to say, is the Lord and Savior of the comic book movie. And for 23 movies, indeed they were. But then they had a lot of other different kinds of pressures put on them. You had the pandemic, you had Disney Plus, and Disney Plus, they made all the people, look, the problem is everybody thinks that making movies and TV somehow, yeah, you can just, hey, we're starting Disney Plus, we'll just make 6 Star Wars shows and 6 Marvel shows, and it'll be really easy. No, it's not. What I would have said, you know, if I was ever in a position, I would have sat down and I would have plotted out, like any great comic book creator worth their salt, you have to plot out the story that you're telling. And I think that post Endgame, it's really been all over the place. And it hasn't worked. And the multiverse story needed a lot more care and time put into it. It's all over the place. And they've done things that they've shattered the reality of what they created. I thought the TVA was a huge mistake. Huge mistake. It broke, believe it or not, I think it broke the reality, the verisimilitude of the fictitious fantasy universe they'd created. You can always do that. When you go too far and it doesn't work anymore, you're done. You're finished. So it's kind of a bummer that happens. But what can you do about something like that? Now, I do want to read another Bond article to read. I have a couple that I have found that I'd like to jump into because they're interesting. And this one is Scott Mendelson wrote it in Forbes. And he published this on October 20th, 2021. How James Bond movies became more popular by refusing to evolve. Hollywood became so focused on kid-friendly, nostalgia-driven action fantasies that the 007 series is now considered prestigious grown-up cinema. With 103.8 million domestic and 474 million worldwide, Cary Fukunaga and Daniel Craig's No Time to Die has passed the 468 million cume of Godzilla vs. Kong. It's the second biggest Hollywood flick in terms of raw global grosses for 2020 and 2021. Whether it stays strong, especially overseas, and passes the 716 million cume of Fast 9 is an open question. Considering that both films are being distributed overseas by Universal, with MGM handling domestic for Bond 25, Comcast views this as a heads-I-win, tails-you-lose situation. It is already playing globally with Australia, where Skyfall earned 50 million and Spectre earned 25 million, set for November 11th, and China, where Skyfall earned 59 million and Spectre earned 83 million, set for October 29th. Whether it nears $800 million or even makes money before post-theatrical, his pandemic-era earnings proves the 007 franchise is as relevant as ever. Keep in mind, this is the last theatrically released James Bond movie. First, the circumstances by which No Time to Die could end up with around $750 million in worldwide box office grosses and still barely break even in a global theatrical revenue is a matter of unlikely to be replicated circumstances. Had Danny Boyle not been swapped for Cary Fukunaga, No Time to Die would have flourished in November of 2019. Whatever cost overruns created by 18 months of COVID-specific delays would not reoccur, assuming Bond 26 doesn't open amid surprise global pandemic. Second, many of the ideas being tossed around regarding how to rejuvenate the franchise, a soft reboot with a younger actor on a smaller budget, are what will inevitably happen by default next time. Third, no matter what MGM and friends decide to do going forward, they must not mess with the formula too much. The industry around it has changed to the point where James Bond is unique unto itself in the blockbuster landscape. I think that's absolutely true. James Bond is its own genre. Sure, is it a spy thriller? Yes. Is it in the action genre? Yes. James Bond with 25 movies is, in fact, its own genre. And the problem is, with all of the corporately held IP, everyone's trying to change everything into something else. They tried to change Star Trek into Star Wars. They're still trying to change it into Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Guardians of the Galaxy. To, I think, terrible results. Modern Star Trek has no pop culture footprint. None. It has less of a pop culture footprint than the fucking Avatar movies do. You cannot change what something is and get a successful result from it. It doesn't work. Because the very people that like what it was in the first place, you lose them. And with the pop culture the way it is now, you're never going to gain new viewers unless you have something absolutely phenomenal, whether it's Game of Thrones or Sopranos or something that really transcends time. I mean, you know, right now you've got things like White Lotus that become have more of a cultural footprint than Star Trek does. So what you can't do, and everybody's going to try and do this, is everybody weighs in. People that were never fans, were never scholars of what it is. They know what these things are based on the pop culture sense memory osmosis that you get when you give these things a cursory glance. But nobody really has a holistic understanding of why these franchises have existed, in the case of Bond now, for 63 years. So now you have, we'll get to it, hang on. The Sean Connery films flourished as you can't get this anywhere else, action travelogue spectacles. However, the Roger Moore films eventually struggled against the post-Jaws Star Wars wave of big-budget Hollywood blockbusters like Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, Beverly Hills Cop. Timothy Dalton's The Living Daylights in 1987 and License to Kill in 1989 were outmatched by new wave actioners like Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, and Rambo First Blood Parts 2. The Pierce Brosnan films impressively held their own between $330 million and $437 million from 1995 to 2002 against action competition. The Rock, Speed, Face Off, Air Force One, The Fugitive, spoofs like the Austin Powers trilogy, fantasy franchises like The Matrix, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings, and espionage action contenders like Triple X, the Bourne films, and the Mission Impossible series. The 007 series was an early lesson in the value of marquee characters and not outsmarting yourself. Audiences may have begun flocking to movies about pirates, superheroes, and eventually robots, but they still showed up for James Bond because they liked the character and the tropes. This continued into Daniel Craig's post-9/11 run with Casino Royale, which made $600 million in 2006. Quantum of Solace made $585 million. Skyfall made $1.1 billion, and Spectre made $881 million, and it sent the 007 franchise to new global box office heights. Daniel Craig's James Bond fended off challenges from the resurgent and 007-inspired Fast and the Furious installments, $788 million in 2013 and $1.5 billion in 2015 and $1.2 billion in 2017, and Tom Cruise's later and more stunt-driven Mission Impossible sequels. Bond stood tallest even among attempts to revive the Bourne series and the Triple X series, and new contenders like Kingsman and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., save for the Fast saga. James Bond still reigns supreme among real-world action franchises. Moreover, During the 6-year gap between Spectre and No Time to Die, Hollywood became more focused on 4-quadrant youth skewing. I guess, you know what? That's right. So that gap was as long as the gap between License to Kill and because No Time to Die was delayed for so long because it was supposed to come out in 2019. The thing is, it was delayed because of the pandemic. So I'm not going to say they had already made it. It would have come out in time. So that let's put an asterisk. Let's put a Thunderbolts asterisk by that. More than ever, the James Bond films stand out by offering not just action, but, well, everything else associated with the 59-year-old franchise. Where once audiences flocked to the James Bond series because you couldn't get the action and spectacle anywhere else, now the series' other trappings, the sex-positive girls, the easy-to-seduce boys, the glitz, the gadgets, the locales, the cars, etc., are in comparatively short supply outside the 007 movies. In a youth-skewering superhero world, James Bond films are the closest to a now powered aspirational action hero for adults. Yes, Hollywood has devolved, to the extent that the series now qualifies as a one-of-a-kind prestige adult-skewing filmmaking. The James Bond series became even more unique unto itself and truly aspirational in the broader blockbuster marketplace. At least since GoldenEye 26 years ago, the James Bond series has been asking whether the franchise is still culturally relevant and commercially viable. The answer 9 times in a row has been yes. So maybe the films can stop apologizing for their existence. While 007 has appropriated cinematic trends and adapted to the outside world since 1962, the core franchise has remained primarily unchanged. Conversely, the theatrical industry has become defined less by star-driven studio programmers and more by marquee characters, be it Thor or Freddie Mercury, and fantastical superheroes. Rumors of Bond's cultural irrelevance have been greatly exaggerated. The series has gotten away with merely pretending that each new installment was more progressive than its predecessors. More importantly, audiences like the James Bond series for the only available here elements. With Hollywood dominated by Marvel and DC movies, Disney's nostalgia and horror flicks, James Bond has gone from nobody does it better to nobody else does it at all. So that I thought was worth reading and definitely something to remember. We've already seen new tries at Bond-esque things like the Citadel fail miserably. And the Russo brothers were involved. They spent ungodly sums of money on that, but they couldn't get it right. Now you have Amazon, that they have a new European or international theatrical division they want to start up, and I think Bond is key to their plans. But immediately, what are they doing? They're thinking of Bond as a franchise. We're going to have female agents, 00 agents that we don't know yet. Probably a young James Bond series. I think if I was given it my druthers, I would make a Spectre series and show how Spectre's roots go back hundreds of years and make it a historical epic, make a 10-episode or more than that, and make show us Spectre through the years, you know? The Spectre agents. How did Blofeld ascend to the top of Spectre? I think you could do a cool thing. 250 years of Spectre history. But that's just me. That would require a lot of work and a lot of creativity. I would say this. Does the Bond franchise have a future under Amazon? Well, it's going to have one whether we wish it or not. Kind of like War is Upon You in Middle-earth. But I do think that what is key is Amazon needs to find people that are way more talented than the 2 yo-yos they hired to do the Rings of Power. Look, if you could get Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan's brother, coming off the success that is Fallout, I think whatever he could do would be great. I'm not even against a James Bond series if it's considered or made a prestige series like a House of the Dragon, with those kinds of production values and that kind of money being spent. But you need somebody, you need showrunners that really they must love what they're doing and they have to have great ideas. You cannot sit here and come in and say, we're going to change James Bond and make it like this and make it like that. No, James Bond is its own genre. You have to work within that genre. But again, like with everything, you need great characters and a great story, and you need people that know how to do those things. And frankly, I don't think there's very many people alive on this planet today that know how to handle James Bond. And by the way, I'm not saying that I do, because I certainly don't have the credibility to do it. I'm saying within the industry as it exists right now, there are very few people. Tony Gilroy, who is doing Andor, he wrote and directed Michael Clayton. I think Tony Gilroy could deliver a great modern Bond. I think the world that we're seeing a world nowadays, people joke about Elon Musk being a Bond villain. I mean, you literally have the richest man in the world building rocket ships beyond what even NASA could do, which is amazing. And he did tweet out that he's going to launch another a starship next week. And everyone gets better. He's getting closer and closer. The man is the closest we have to putting a moon base on the moon, or getting to Mars. And now he's acting like a Bond villain. But I'm a fan. I'm a fan of what he's done. And, he doesn't have to, he knows how to find people that know what they're doing. He grabs their companies and then becomes a figurehead. And no one can take away what he was able to do and is still doing with SpaceX. So it's pretty amazing. But when you live in a world where Elon Musk is landing rocket boosters from orbit at sea on barges, you're living in a world where you need to up the ante. And I wonder, can James Bond be a credible character in this day and age? I think he can. Again, you need somebody who's really, really creative and really knows what they're doing and is also really, really smart. There's a final article I would like to read that was also from Medium, and this was just published the other day. And I thought this was pretty interesting. And this is the final article I'm going to read on this subject. James Bond defeated by tech billionaire. My thoughts on the rights to 007 passing to Amazon MGM. This was published by Simon Dillon in the fanfare section of Medium 3 days ago. And by the way, this does have major spoilers, as he said, for No Time to Die. So if you haven't watched it, another very disappointing Bond film, I have to say. News that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson have given control of James Bond to Amazon MGM sent shockwaves through the Bondosphere yesterday. I'm just as guilty as many Bond fans of hitting the roof upon hearing the news. A brief glance at social media forums mirrored many of my own concerns. The BBC also reported on this response. Can this British national institution be trusted in the hands of Americans? No. Has Bond finally been beaten by a tech billionaire? Is Bond about to be politically corrected, become a woman, or otherwise be emasculated? James Bond is particularly beloved by British audiences, but that hasn't stopped Amazon from milking obscure corners of The Lord of the Rings, another British sacred text, to inept and artistically redundant effects. Who is to say the same thing won't happen with Bond? It probably will. The No Time to Die debacle. After peeling myself off the ceiling and procuring from the metaphorical medicine cabinet what my American brethren sometimes refer to as a chill pill, I tried to assess the situation more objectively. Yes, the Broccoli family and Michael Wilson have safeguarded the Bond series for decades, but let's be honest, No Time to Die in 2021 was a letdown, aside from that fun bit with Ana de Armas, and the ending was unforgivable. Killing James Bond was folly on multiple levels, and I fear Broccoli and Wilson were too indulgent of Daniel Craig's idea for him to die. It remains a fundamental betrayal of the cinematic Bond audience. Yes, I know Ian Fleming's books are different. When we see a Bond film, we want to enjoy the seemingly infinite pleasure of witnessing our favorite British secret agent triumph over the villain against the odds. He's meant to be indomitable. He's meant to escape the surely he'll never get out of this peril. He's meant to triumph. In short, he is meant to provide escapist entertainment. I'll never forget the silent, numb disbelief in the cinema when I saw No Time to Die. The audience wasn't shocked in a good way. They simply couldn't believe the filmmakers could be that stupid. Insisting we swallow a Bond film when he gets killed off immediately after the COVID pandemic when all we want is escapism? Ridiculous. There's no way Broccoli and Wilson could have known the pandemic was coming, but damn it, James Bond isn't meant to die. This isn't the Avengers when you can sacrifice one character because there's an ensemble to pick up the pieces. It doesn't add dramatic weight like killing off a beloved character in a Star Wars film. Instead, it simply renders the film redundant, especially when the end credits explicitly state James Bond will return, in which case, why bother killing him? Unless this is a Sherlock Holmes at the Reichenbach Falls type moment, with him turning out to survive in the next story, which this isn't, there's absolutely no excuse to do this. It's as foolish as Hercule Poirot murder mystery without a reveal of the killer, or a remake of The Godfather in which Michael Corleone lives happily ever after as a legitimate businessman. Bearing in mind a change of the guard could just possibly be a good thing. However, I remain skeptical about the rights to James Bond in the hands of a monster corporation like Amazon, especially in an era when many beloved series are being squeezed dry with little to no artistic consideration in the name of algorithmically driven content. if you'll forgive my use of an obscenity. Despite the mistakes of No Time to Die, Broccoli and Wilson safeguarded the series for many years, and I wish they'd passed it on to someone with similar integrity. As it stands, many now predict that Bond will wind up oversaturated across multiple pointless storylines and spin-offs the way Disney have exploited Marvel and Star Wars. Yes, I accept that filmmaking is a business. However, to echo the eternal cry of all creatives, profit should not come at the expense of artistry. Au contraire, a profit comes because of artistry. I mean, remember, nobody ever got rich in Hollywood following a trend. Hollywood gets rich setting trends. Therefore, here's my advice to whoever Jeff Bezos puts in charge of Bond. James Bond should be for the cinema. Everyone who has grown up since Bond's first cinematic adventure, Dr. No, understands that these films are a special treat every 2 or 3 years. Once you were old enough, you'd be escorted by parents to the cinema, and the thrills and galore ensued. As I've already noted, this tradition is particularly important in the UK. The last thing we need is this rite of passage watered down by endless TV spin-offs, or worse, denied entirely. We don't need to know M's backstory in Northern Ireland, nor about Q's dating disasters or why Moneypenny decided she'd be better behind a desk. We already got that in 2012 Skyfall in any case. We don't need spin-offs about 001 through 009, nor do we need a Felix Leiter series, the tale of Blofeld's abusive childhood, or any other revisionist two sides to every story foolishness. And above all, Bond needs to stay on the big screen. There should be a new adventure once every 2 to 3 years and nothing more. Those demanding more Bond need to understand there's a reason parents tell children more ice cream is a bad idea. The first helping is great, the second is okay, and the third makes you want to throw up. The same is true for Bond, and Star Wars for that matter, as Disney has since discovered. In the end, you become indifferent or don't want to bother. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, and this approach will keep Bond special. It should always be an event, not a run-of-the-mill content drop. If you'll forgive my use of another obscenity, why on earth is everything dropped these days? Won't it break? What's wrong with being released? James Bond should not be politically correct. This series has never been on the cutting edge of feminism, to put it mildly. However, over the decades, there have been admirable attempts to give female characters in Bond films more agency. I fully support this, as fully dimensional characters make for better stories. Indeed, I'd argue the Bond girls in the early Sean Connery films were a lot more integral to the plot and treated with less sexism than in many of the later Roger Moore installments. Yes, there was still sexism in the Connery era, but the leading women weren't simply there for decorative purposes. Later, when Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and especially Daniel Craig, the female characters were much better developed. That should continue to be the case in all future films. All that said, Bond himself should remain, as M amusingly observed in GoldenEye, a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. Or at the very least, a philanderer whose encounters with women are seldom more than recreational. There's no reason in this day of hookup apps and the like that Bond shouldn't carry on as he's always done, but on equal terms with his sexual partners. What's more, the films themselves don't have to condone his behavior. Indeed, from the very start, his shenanigans in this respect proved his Achilles heel. Beyond that, I think it needs to be reiterated that James Bond should not be reimagined as a woman, per what Barbara Broccoli has long asserted. They tried that with a movie called The Rhythm Section. It didn't really work. Do you remember The Rhythm Section? People might be amused to watch it now. Go and see. However, he doesn't necessarily need to be white. Britain is a multicultural society, and in this day and age, it's entirely possible and plausible for a man of African or Asian descent to be Britain's top spy. James Bond should be contemporary. Here's where I'm going to cross swords with some Bond fans. It has been mooted, allegedly by such cinematic luminaries as Christopher Nolan, that James Bond should now be set in the 1950s and 60s rather than be a contemporary thriller. I disagree. Bond has evolved over the decades and at his best has always been on the technological cutting edge. He's also often been in adventures torn from the headlines, especially during the Cold War. I see no reason to tweak this formula. I've already discussed elsewhere why I believe Nolan should stick to creating original films, so I'll not labor the point here. By the way, Christopher Nolan already made 2 Bond movies with Inception and Tenet. Sort of. With the above in mind, I choose to entertain what is probably a futile hope that Amazon MGM will have a scintilla of integrity when approaching the future of James Bond. I expect I will be proved wrong, and if so, we'll always have the Bond back catalog in which to take solace. if only a little bit of a quantum of solace. However, for now, let's at least attempt to give Bezos the benefit of the doubt and see what he does with 007 before rushing to judgment. Hey, look, I always say, why pillory something before you've seen it? Wait to see it first and then hate on it, if it's worthy of your hate. No one wants to hate things. We're all pre-hating on everything now. It's so boring. It's kind of like the woman at the beginning of Living Daylights when Bond jumps off the Rock of Gibraltar and parachutes down when Schmiert-Spionen, Death to Spies, and lands. They're all so boring, Margot. And he flips down on the deck of the boat and grabs the phone and says, she'll call you back. Who are you? Bond, James Bond. Come on, man. That's what's got to go on. But anyway, look. We've seen Disney buy Star Wars. Disney also acquired Marvel from Paramount. The problem is, once these corporations have spent all this money, and remember, they paid the Broccoli's off $1 billion, which is it's 25% less than, it's 75% less than Disney paid for Star Wars, but $1 billion payoff to the Broccoli's to go away, Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli to go away is a lot. It's a lot of money. And they're going to want to get that money back, unless you're making Rings of Power, which they don't seem to care. But with Bond, they probably want to. And with Bond, they can make theatrical features. I would say there are very few people on God's green earth right now that are capable of making a James Bond movie. Honestly. Very few filmmakers exist right now on this planet. If I had to choose, if somebody, you could say Christopher Nolan, but I'd say that he's already done that, and I want Christopher Nolan to keep making original movies. The person that I would love to see make a Bond movie right now, this might not sit well with people because he's kind of fallen from grace with audiences, or at least favor. People don't remember what magic he used to have, but I think after seeing his recent movies, the one man that I would say should make a James Bond movie right now, if I was in charge of the James Bond franchise, the person that I would go to right now, believe it or not, is Steven fucking Spielberg. Steven Spielberg has wanted to make Bond movies. Raiders of the Lost Ark was kind of his Bond film, but what he needs like his compatriot Steve Zalian. I'd say maybe David Koepp, but no. You need a really smart, better yet, Tony Gilroy writes that script and Spielberg directs it. Go after these guys. You got to go after somebody old school. That would be my advice. Tony Gilroy or Steve Zalian writes the script, and Steven Spielberg directs. And you hire a great British actor to play Bond. And that's what I would do. If, Steven Spielberg's making his very secret alien movie, I guess. Last time he made a secret alien movie, the world got E.T. Maybe he's actually been employed by those aliens that haven't revealed themselves, or the interdimensional beings. And Steven Spielberg's movie is about revealing to the world that, well, the aliens have been here all the time. The interdimensional beings have been here all the time. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. But that's who I would get. I would get Steven Spielberg. I know he's not British, but there hasn't always been British directors making Bond. But that's who I would get. I would get A-list screenwriters to craft an incredible story and let Spielberg go out, on a high note. Maybe it won't be the last movie he directs, but that's who I would pick. You get that Raiders of the Lost Ark feel. He obviously can direct action, but there are very few people. I mean, you could say, I don't think that James Cameron, again, I don't want to interfere with James Cameron making original movies. And I wouldn't want to interfere with Christopher Nolan making original movies. If you want to make a Bond film, sure. But why would he want to when his Bond fetish or his Bond itch? I mean, hell, there's moments in Inception that are like the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but he got to do it originally. Why? But Spielberg could do it. That's my choice. That's what I would say. What do you think? I don't know. Let's see. B Think says, I sometimes wonder if things like James Bond wouldn't work better being made as period pieces. The thing is, if you want a Bond period piece, you can go back to 1962 and watch Dr. No. James Bond already was. You go back and you're going to make a period piece. We already have Bond period pieces. And I think that this article points out that you want Bond to be contemporary. I don't know. Curious to see what the studios do after the new Fantastic Four movie. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do. Regis Red says Aston Martin remade the DB5. It's hand-built, complete with gadgets, and cost $2.5 million. The gadgets version is not road legal, though. I didn't know that. Claudius says, I'd want one. Claudius says, too many Bond fans are caught up with the trappings of beautiful ladies, sex, exotic locales, and luxury porn. Bond stories suck. No tradecraft, no espionage, and no tension. Action scenes have no stakes. Well, they used to. I mean, look when they're trying to get that safe in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's a set piece where they're trying to get a safe in and out of a building. Come on, that was cool. Brian McCann says James Bond should be set in the 60s era, even as a TV series. A period piece works best. Again, we've already had Bond movies set in the 60s, 6 of them. So, yeah. Norwegian Kryptonian, who's been a member of the channel for 46 months, says, hello, Rob, happy birthday. Wow, this is now year 2 because it's February. We're into year 2 of people wishing me a happy birthday. God bless you all. 2 self-contained, 2.5 hour, 2 self-contained, 2 12 episode season spin-off series. One around Rob's Spectre idea and one on Bond's years in the elite SBS. Stagger the releases. I think that's actually a pretty good idea. I like that. Why not? That could work. Again, you need people that understood this kind of thing and why it's good. Peter Cunnington says, what? You don't want to see, hang on. Peter says, what we don't want to see is a James Bond cinematic universe where everything is intertwined and everything is one long story. Amen. You have to see every TV show and every movie, and not everything needs to be a cinematic universe. I totally agree. And the thing about Bond movies is they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a mission you go on, and you either succeed or you don't. And I love that. I think that's the way it should be. Well, look, I'm not despondent over this. I think there's a lot of good stuff. I like The Boys. I like Jack Reacher. Or pardon me, just Reacher. It's not Jack Reacher. I like Reacher. There's great stuff to be had. Fallout was a great show. I enjoyed it immensely for what it was. And it's possible to make great stuff. You need a great creative team. I would hire Steven Spielberg, and I would hire Tony Gilroy and Steve Zalian to write the script. And they could probably write a terrific script. I really do. I mean, the new, Netflix show Zero Day. I've watched 3 episodes of Zero Day. It's interesting. There's lots of really great political thrillers going on. Hell, if you haven't watched Paradise, it's my favorite show running right now. It takes the mystery box story, and instead of waiting a whole season to give you a revelation, it gives you revelations every single week. Another episode, as a matter of fact, drops at midnight. I love me some Paradise, man. That show is dope. And there's a great Bond villain in it. If you're not watching Paradise, go watch it. Don't read anything about it. Don't ask any. Just take the advice of your Uncle Bob here. Go watch Paradise. Report back. I'm telling you, it's a banger of a show. And it's got good stuff happening in it. And on that note, everybody, I think I'm going to end this. Oh, wait a minute. Thomas Logan said, per the Hollywood Reporter, Ta-Nehisi Coates is penning the Bond reboot. The central plot is Bond atoning for his gross sexism, racism, and colonialism. Bond will apologize. Yeah, no. That's another thing. Everybody, Bond's a colonizer. Yeah, well, in the long run, has colonization been really bad? I mean, look, hasn't all of human history been examples of somebody colonizing somebody else? Isn't that kind of our history? That's what it is. I mean, go far back. Didn't everybody, Genghis Khan, the Muslim, the Islamic conquering? I mean, who didn't? Everybody's conquered everybody at some point. Ultimately, that's kind of what leads to progress, in a way. it's not necessarily a good thing. But hey, Bond, you know what? I'm sure people would object that the British were the great colonizers. Oh well. As Obi-Wan Kenobi once said, from a certain point of view, look, if you're going to think that way, you're never going to have great stories. Human beings are terrible, awful people. We aspire to be better. James Bond is one of our heroes, even though he doesn't really exist. I want to watch more Bond movies. I want to see a Bond movie directed by Steven Spielberg. And at this point, I mean, maybe Quentin Tarantino. I think the problem with Quentin Tarantino is I don't know if he could do a Bond film that isn't somehow self-reflexive. I hope they keep the Bond theme. I hope they keep the Bond logo. You know, I hope they keep the cool titles. And I hope Daniel Kleinman gets to do one more opening title sequence. I really do. But hey, in 2 or 3 years, we can all use AI to generate our own James Bond movies. So there's that. So chop chop, Amazon. You better get started. Get on that right now. Call Spielberg. He's probably in post on his movie. You know, and he's able to make 2 or 3 movies a year. We've seen it. The man had Jurassic Park and Schindler's List come out in the same year. He's not getting any younger. Give him a buzz. Tell him Bob Burnett sent you. All right. And on that note, I want to thank all of you for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips. I want to thank my moderating staff, beginning with Tom Jr. Jackson, and I don't know who else is here, but you guys are the best. Uh-oh, I have to reload. They're always trying to throttle me on this channel. I don't know why. But so thank you all. And we will be having a member chat this coming weekend and all that stuff. And you guys are great. And I want to thank you for that. And I will be back. I will be doing 4 in a row. I'll be doing tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday, actually. I guess 5 in a row? Yeah, why not? We'll talk about something more interesting tomorrow. And thanks for all tuning in, and I very much appreciate it. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, all you people I hope you do all die another day, but not today. Have a good night.